Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We're back with our second hour of All In. It's a holiday weekend. It's Memorial Day. A lot of people observing that today. It's not just for us, but for Congress, too. Remember last week, Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson cut his members loose early for the weekend without voting on their own budget reconciliation bill. John Thune sent them hope in the Senate. That's where the reconciliation bill was going to move first. It's a move that they both took to avoid having to grapple with the anger in both parties over Donald Trump's unprecedented seditionist slush fund. Being away from Washington does not mean the controversy's gone away. Congressman Jamie Raskin, a Democrat, and Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican, have both filed bills to block Trump's $1.8 billion slush fund. Democrats have also filed to block the slush fund with the federal court overseeing Trump's lawsuit. Lawsuits against the fund have already been filed by other public interest groups, Capitol Metropolitan Police officers, a fired January 6th prosecutor, other people targeted by the Trump DOJ. Democrats have vowed that when the House returns to vote on that reconciliation bill in the Senate, right, that they're going to have an opportunity, because of the way reconciliation works, to force votes on a slew of amendments to block the slush fund, including things like, imagine this, an amendment to make sure none of the money in the fund can go to people convicted of, say, child sexual assault, right? Do you want to vote on that if you're a Republican? Do you want to vote no on that? All in an attempt to force Republicans to have to take a position on this. Pick a side, Trump or the American taxpayer. No one's entirely sure how those votes would shake out yet. On Sunday, Republican Senator Thom Tillis, who previously called the Trump slush fund stupid on stilts, suggested the Trump DOJ could have trouble getting the funding it wants if it allows the president's insurrectionist giveaway to proceed.
There's no way that we're going to be in a position to fund $1.5 billion for an anti-fraud division when we've got this bogus 1776. I called it a payout pot for punks. You just can't have those two equivalent numbers at the same time. It makes no sense. So it's politically tone deaf. Whoever did it should be fired. Let's figure out a way to help people who are victims of warfare, but not people who are convicted by a jury of their peers or pled guilty to assaulting a police officer. Please.
Norm Eisen served as an ethics lawyer in the Obama White House and co-founded Democracy Defenders Action, which is fighting Trump's slush fund in federal court. Lisa Rubin, of course, MS Now senior legal reporter who's been following this. They both join me now. Lisa, let me start with you. I think what Thom Tillis meant to say there was victims not of warfare, but of lawfare, which is the term they like to use in the right, where they have a sort of story they tell about lawfare, the weaponization of the law against people that were Donald Trump. Now, a lot of this actually happened under Departments of Justice that were controlled by Donald Trump and Republican Attorney General. But the thing that occurs to me as I watch all of this, right, play out is that you can sue if you're a Jan 6er and you feel you got bum treatment, you can sue the government. Like, the fact is, it's probably not going to do that well. So this idea that, like, oh, well, there's no recourse to these people. There's all the recourse that any of us have in civil litigation. Knock yourself out. File some suits. Go to town.
That's absolutely true. And by the way, that same recourse was available to then citizen Trump in between his two terms of office. How do I know that? Because the guy filed two administrative claims under what's called the Federal Tort Claims Act. Those were the two pending claims having to do with the Mar-a-Lago search. That is part and parcel of this same settlement. But I want to go back to the term lawfare, because I think it's really interestingly defined in the settlement, and it's something that not enough people have focused on. And the terms lawfare and weaponization sort of are defined in the same phrase, almost in the alternative for one another. But what they mean, according to the settlement agreement, is the sustained use of the levers of government power by Democrat elected officials, comma, and then it says political and career federal employees, contractors and agents in order to target individuals, groups, and entities for improper and unlawful political, personal, and or ideological reasons. If you lop off the phrase Democrat elected officials, the terms lawfare and weaponization could encompass any range of existing Department of Justice investigations and prosecutions that affect a bunch of people who even served in the Biden administration.
Yes, exactly.
So unless and until this anti-weaponization fund that has been empowered by the settlement agreement defines it differently, and good luck to them if they do so, it seems to me, and our colleague Barbara McQuaid suggested this on a show earlier this week. I don't want to take credit for her really fascinating idea. There are lots of people out there whose names are Letitia James,
James Comey,
and correct, who should file
Gilmore
claims under
Rodrigo
this.
Garcia.
And they include people who are now plaintiffs in lawsuits to end this weaponization fund as well. People like the City of New Haven or the National Abortion Federation, Common Cause. technically speaking, under the terms of the settlement agreement, because they did not identify stringent criteria for who can take from this and who can't, they seem to me to be eligible to file claims. And let the government refuse them, and then let's see what shakes out legally.
Well, and to you, Norm, I mean, that the fact that it's a striking thing when you look at the language of the settlement that they use a partisan indicator there, Democratic elected officials, which to me, Norm, like, that's just, again, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm married to one who actually worked with you in the Obama White House. Like, that just seems constitutionally impermissible on its face. Like, you can't be sorting out claims based on, like, well, if it was a Democratic elected official who did it.
That's right, Chris. There's a constitutional and a statutory scheme that govern payments, in this case, to be made from the Department of Justice Judgment Fund. And you're not allowed to say, I'm only going to pay those who were prosecuted by Democrats. You're not allowed to make these payments at all. It's contrary to the statute. Donald, it implicates the emoluments clause, the part of the Constitution that says the president cannot get any other payments other than his salary, because they've given him a $1.7 billion slush fund to distribute to cronies. So it's illegal up at that point within minutes in our first legal filing, and we're going to keep on rolling. We have much more ahead. And we and the rest of the coalition are fighting this tooth and nail. I think the first dollar will never be paid from this legal Superfund site.
I hope you're right. I also think if I were forced to bet, I would bet with you. But one of the things I think about here, and this is something we've seen over and over again, this gets to sort of a deep question of constitutional structure, which is there's lots of places where this administration has done things, particularly with money, that seem to fly in the face of the constitutional separation of powers. And because Congress has been so docile and submissive, controlled by Republicans, the avenue ends up being lawsuits, right? Through different avenues. And Norm has done a lot of litigating, and it's been very successful. Fundamentally, though, Congress controls the purse strings. Congress can come back tomorrow, both houses, and say, no, absolutely not. Pass bills that bar it, right?
They absolutely can. And if Congress were not so invested in abdicating its own power, we wouldn't be in this situation. One of the things I find most interesting about this moment is that there are a number of people on the Supreme Court that are more jealous of the congressional prerogative to spend money than Congress itself appears to be, right? So, like, the Neil Gorsuches of the world who are really interested in this non-delegation principle, which means Congress shouldn't basically give up its powers to regulatory agencies. They should take a lesson from the Neil Gorsuches of the world now. But you're right. Congress can stop this at any point in time in at least two ways. One, they could put forth language that just basically bars the anti-weaponization fund itself from taking money out of the judgment fund. Or they could fix the judgment fund itself, because there are reasons to believe that the judgment fund itself is broken. The judgment fund is not an annual appropriation. It's what's called a perpetual appropriation. There's a bunch of money that's sitting in it. And many, many decades ago, Congress lifted the $100,000 cap on when agencies could sort of raid the judgment fund. That has led to the use of the judgment fund for all sorts of things, including the payment to Ashley Babbitt's survivors, for example, or others. Congress, if they're really worried about the use of the judgment fund, they should look beyond this particular situation, because there are bipartisan reasons to believe that the judgment fund is being abused.
And normally, Norm, when we have these conversations about the sort of, doing this through Congress as opposed to litigation, I think it's like, well, yeah, good luck. That and $3 gets you on the subway. But in this case, I actually do think they will be able to get petitions on signatories on a discharge petition. I think you can find a few Republicans, and I think Republicans in the Senate, particularly after likely John Cornyn loses tomorrow in the primary, I don't think it's crazy to say you could actually see legislation that moves to block this. What do you think?
The last time that we saw this kind of a signature corruption scandal, the Epstein files, an abuse of power in that case to benefit Donald Trump and others, where we know there's additional files, very likely with his name on them, that aren't being released. Congress did break in the face of that corruption. Here you have financial corruption, corruption of the rule of law. You're already seeing members of both houses speaking out publicly. Reportedly, 24 confronted Todd Blanche, Republicans, when he came up to try to defend it. So if it's not stopped in the courts, and if Donald Trump doesn't yank it, I do think you'll have that kind of belt and suspenders of Congress stepping in. That's why I believe we're not going to see money likely paid out of this slush fund.
He talks about Todd Blanche, and I want to ask, as someone who's been, covering the Justice Department and covering the law here, there's a very sort of darkly comedic, cynical Russian folk expression, tomorrow will be worse. Like, it could always get worse. Like, you think it's bad now, it could always get worse. And I think of that because I think Pam Bondi was a terrible attorney general, personally, editorializing. What's become clear since her exit is that she was probably stopping some bad things from happening, as bad as she was. It feels a little like, since she left, things have gotten worse. Like,
they've certainly escalated.
Yeah, like the Comey indictment, that indictment was for the 8647 that was swirling around as a possibility. It didn't happen under her. It has happened under Todd Blanche. This settlement, again, swirling around, had reporting. Someone was holding that up, no longer being held up. Do you think it's a fair conclusion, just from what we've seen in the first few weeks, I guess, or month of Todd Blanche's tenure?
Absolutely. I think Todd Blanche is strategic. I think Todd Blanche is smart. And Todd Blanche was a career prosecutor in the Department of Justice, something Pam Bondi never was. Yeah. So when Todd Blanche was first floated, both as the acting attorney general and sort of the presumptuous heir to this, I predicted that this was going to happen because Todd Blanche knows exactly how to pull the levers of the Department of Justice. And whether Pam Bondi was ineffective ineffective from Donald Trump's point of view, because it was purposeful or because she didn't really understand a department she had never worked in, is not for me to judge. But what I can tell you is that Todd Blanche seems to be rolling out new initiatives each day. He is flying to cities and or flying in U.S. attorneys to come to the Justice Department so that with each new indictment, for example, he is there alongside the U.S. attorney who's prosecuting the case. Raul Castro's newest indictment is a good case in point of that. Todd Blanche didn't really need to be there. The U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida could have announced that they had indicted Raul Castro. But instead, what do? They do it on a day of significance to Cuban Americans with Todd Blanche and Senator Ashley Moody standing there. I've never seen a sitting U.S. senator present for the announcement of an indictment before.
Great point.